Welcome to the King Tales. Thank you for the love and support. Let's dive in. The days that followed did not suddenly become easy. Passing the scholarship exam was a victory, but it was only the beginning. The new term required uniforms, books, sandals, transportation money. Victory still needed provision. Yugochi sat on the thin mat one evening, counting the small notes she had earned from the restaurant and the laundry shop. The money was barely enough for food and rent. She looked at Adoni's scholarship letter again and traced the school stamp with her finger. "We will manage," she whispered. The next morning, she spoke to Janet at the restaurant. "Madam Janet," she said carefully, "can I work extra hours in the morning? Even if it is just sweeping?" Janet looked at her for a moment. "You are serious about your child's schooling?" "Yes," Yugochi replied simply. Janet nodded. "Come earlier tomorrow. We will see." At the laundry shop, Peter noticed she was ironing faster and more carefully than before. "You want to collect the whole shop," he joked. Yugochi smiled slightly. "I just want steady work." Peter scratched his chin. "If customers increase, I will keep you full-time." Little by little, doors that once looked shut began to open just a crack. At school, Adoni changed too. She no longer walked with her head down. She studied harder, asked questions in class, and stayed back when Teacher Grace offered extra lessons for scholarship students. One afternoon, Stella approached her again, but this time her voice was quieter. "Is it true you passed the scholarship?" she asked. "Yes," Adoni replied calmly. Stella hesitated. "My mother says scholarships are for very intelligent students." Adoni shrugged. "Anyone can pass if they work." It was not pride in her voice. It was truth. Mary smiled at her from across the classroom. Respect had replaced gossip. Back in the compound, life continued with its usual noise. Kate sometimes borrowed salt from Yugochi. Rose occasionally sent leftovers too. Even Mr. Paul, the landlord, stopped frowning as much when he saw that rent came on time. One evening, as Yugochi returned from work, she saw a familiar car parked near the street corner outside the compound. Her steps slowed. It was the same model Elizabeth used to drive. Her heart skipped. For a moment, fear tried to rise again, the old fear of being called useless, of being spoken to like nothing. But then she remembered the thin mat, the scholarship letter, her daughter's steady voice. The car drove past without stopping. Yugochi exhaled slowly. The past had power only if she gave it power. Months later, the scholarship covered Adoni's school fees completely. Teacher Grace helped them apply for a small book grant. Janet increased Yugochi's hours. Peter trusted her with more customers' clothes. One night, as they lay on their mat, Adoni turned to her mother. "Mommy," she said softly, "are you happy?" Yugochi thought carefully before answering. "I am tired," she admitted. Adoni giggled. "But yes," Yugochi continued. "I am happy. Because I passed." Adoni asked. "No," Yugochi said, touching her daughter's cheek gently. "Because we did not break." Outside, the generators hummed as always. The compound remained crowded. The room was still small. But inside that small space lived something large: courage, dignity, and a future being built step by step. They had left the mansion with nothing but bags and fear. Now they carried something stronger. Hope was no longer fragile. It had roots. Years did not change their address immediately, but they changed their direction. Adoni moved into junior secondary school under the scholarship program. The school was bigger, the subjects harder, the expectations higher. On her first day, she stood at the gate in a neatly washed uniform that Yugochi had ironed carefully the night before. "Remember," Yugochi said, adjusting her collar, "knowledge is something nobody can throw away." Adoni nodded. "Like they threw us out." Yugochi paused, then smiled gently. Exactly. But this, she tapped her daughter's forehead lightly, this stays. Adoni walked through the gates with steady steps. Work became more stable for Ugochi. Janet's restaurant grew busier, and eventually Janet trusted her to handle customers and collect payments. "You are honest," Janet said one afternoon. "That is rare." At Peter's laundry shop, customers began to ask for her specifically. "Let that woman iron it," one customer said. "She doesn't burn clothes." Peter laughed loudly at that, but Ugochi felt something quiet inside her heel. The small burn mark that once cost her a home had turned into careful mastery. She learned how to control the iron perfectly, how to test fabric before pressing, how to remove stubborn stains. What once caused shame became skill. Adoni faced new challenges too. In secondary school, competition was tougher. Some students came from wealthy homes, carrying new textbooks and expensive bags. One afternoon, she returned home quieter than usual. "What happened?" Ugochi asked. "They were talking about vacations," Adoni said softly. "London. Dubai. Big places." Ugochi nodded slowly. "And what did you say?" "Nothing." "Good," Ugochi replied calmly. "Not every silence is weakness. Sometimes silence is preparation." Adoni looked at her mother thoughtfully. "Will I ever travel?" she asked. "Yes," Ugochi said firmly. "Not because you want to show people, but because your work will take you there." Adoni smiled at that. One evening, teacher Grace visited their compound. She stood carefully to avoid puddles near the walkway. Children ran past her, laughing. Ugochi was surprised to see her. "Good evening, Mo," Ugochi greeted respectfully. Grace smiled warmly. "I wanted to see where my best student studies." Adoni blushed. Grace stepped into the small room and looked around without judgment. "This place is small," she said gently, "but the spirit here is big." She turned to Ugochi. "Your daughter has potential beyond this city. There are science competitions next year. I want her to try." Ugochi felt both fear and pride rise together. "We will try," she said. Grace nodded. "That is all success ever asks. Try." Time moved forward. Adoni entered competitions and won small certificates. She stayed up late solving mathematics problems while generators hummed outside. She borrowed books from the school library and read them under flickering bulbs. Ugochi continued working, saving small amounts whenever possible. Sometimes it was only a few notes hidden carefully inside a tin box. But she saved with purpose. One afternoon, years later, a letter arrived. It carried the logo of a national university. Adoni held it with shaking hands. "Open it," Ugochi whispered. Adoni tore it carefully. Her eyes scanned the page once, then again. "I got in," she breathed. Ugochi didn't understand at first. "What?" "I got admission. Full scholarship." For a moment, the compound noise disappeared. The shouting, the generators, the arguing, all faded. Ugochi sat down slowly on the edge of the mat. Full scholarship. The same city that once pushed them out was now opening a gate. Adoni knelt in front of her mother. "Mommy," she said softly, "we are leaving this room." Ugochi touched her daughter's face, just as she had done years ago in the cold mansion. "No," she said gently. "We are rising from it." Tears filled her eyes again, but they were not the quiet tears of pain from long ago. They were tears of fulfillment. The day Adoni left for university, the compound gathered to watch. Kate hugged her. Rose brought fried plantain. Even Mr. Paul nodded proudly. "You did well," he said gruffly. Adoni turned to her mother before entering the bus. "You kept school continuing," she said. Ugochi smiled. "You kept your promise." As the bus drove away, Ugochi stood still, her scarf moving slightly in the wind. Years ago, she had walked out of a mansion carrying fear. Now she stood in a crowded compound carrying pride. The world had not changed overnight. But a mother's decision, made on a noisy Lagos night, had rewritten a future. And somewhere ahead, beyond the noise and struggle, a new chapter was waiting to begin. University life stretched Adoni in ways she had never imagined. The campus was larger than any place she had ever known, lecture halls filled with hundreds of students, libraries that smelled of old books and ambition, laboratories buzzing with quiet concentration. For the first few weeks, she felt small again. Not because she was poor, but because the world was wide. During orientation, students introduced themselves confidently. Some spoke about traveling abroad. Others talked about parents who were doctors, engineers, business owners. When it was her turn, Adoni stood straight. "My name is Adoni Ugochi," she said clearly. "I am here on scholarship. I want to study engineering." Her voice did not shake. That night, she called home. "Mommy, the campus is very big." Ugochi smiled through the phone. "Good. It means your future is big too." Back in the compound in Lagos, life continued as usual. Generators still roared. Children still ran barefoot across the walkway. But Ugochi's room felt different now. Quieter. Lonelier. She still worked at Janet's restaurant, though now she supervised 2 younger girls. At the laundry shop, Peter often relied on her to manage customers when he stepped out. "You should open your own place one day," Janet told her. Ugochi laughed softly. One step at a time. But something inside her had begun to imagine more. University was not easy. Adoni faced difficult courses, long nights, and moments of doubt. During her first semester exams, she scored lower than expected in mathematics. She stared at the result sheet in disbelief. For a brief second, fear returned, the old fear of not being enough. She called her mother. "I failed one test," she confessed. There was silence on the other end. Then Ugochi said calmly, "Did you stop breathing?" "No." "Did the world end?" "No." "Then you have another chance." Adoni laughed weakly. "Mommy, what if I am not as smart as they think?" Ugochi's voice grew firm. "You did not come this far because of luck. You came because you worked. So work again." Those words settled her heart. She returned to her books, not with panic, but with discipline. Years passed. Adoni improved steadily. She joined a small research group. She applied for internships. One summer, she earned a placement with a reputable engineering firm in the city. On her first day at the office, she wore a simple, well-ironed blouse. As she walked through the glass doors, she remembered the day her mother had been thrown out of a mansion for burning a blouse. Life had turned in quiet circles. But this time, they were rising. During her final year, Adoni stood in front of her class to present her project. Professors listened carefully. When she finished, there was applause. Not loud, but respectful. Months later, she graduated with honors. On graduation day, she searched the crowd until she saw her mother standing near the back, wearing her best wrapper and blouse. Ugochi looked slightly uncomfortable among the polished families, but her eyes were shining. When Adoni's name was called, Ugochi clapped harder than anyone. After the ceremony, Adoni ran to her. "We did it," she whispered. Ugochi shook her head gently, just as she had years ago. "You did it." But this time, Adoni smiled knowingly. "No, Mommy. We did." Soon after graduation, Adoni secured a full-time position with the engineering firm. The salary was more than Ugochi had ever imagined earning in years of washing plates and ironing clothes. The first thing Adoni did was rent a modest but comfortable apartment. Not in a mansion. Not in a crowded compound. but somewhere clean, quiet, and peaceful. When she handed the keys to her mother, Yugochi stared at them for a long time. "This is for you," Adonis said softly. "For us," Yugochi corrected. The day they moved, Yugochi walked through the new apartment slowly, touching the walls as if confirming they were real. No shouting neighbors. No generator fumes leaking through the window. Just quiet. That night, they sat on a proper couch for the first time in years. "Mommy," Adonis said gently, "are you happy?" Yugochi looked around the room. Then she looked at her daughter. "I am proud," she said. Outside, the city of Lagos still moved with its usual chaos, traffic, horns, ambition, survival. But inside the apartment, there was evidence of something stronger than circumstance. A decision made on a painful night. A mother who refused to surrender. A daughter who refused to break. Peace did not make them forget. It only gave them space to remember without pain. Weeks after moving into the new apartment, Yugochi still woke up early out of habit. At 5 a.m., she would sit up, expecting generator noise or someone knocking on the door. But the air was only quiet. The first morning she realized she no longer had to rush to someone else's kitchen. She sat on the edge of her bed and cried softly. Not from sadness. From release. Adonis found her there. "Mommy. I don't know what to do with silence," Yugochi admitted, smiling through tears. Adonis laughed gently. "Rest. That's what you do." For the first time in many years, Yugochi allowed herself to rest. Adonis settled into her new job quickly. She worked hard, just as she had studied hard. Her supervisors noticed her discipline and calm focus. One afternoon, during a meeting, a senior manager asked where she had trained. "Here in Lagos," she replied confidently. "Good foundation," he said with approval. She thought of teacher Grace. She thought of the thin mat, the flickering bulb, the scholarship form filled out carefully by her mother's tired hands. Foundations are not always built with money. Sometimes they are built with sacrifice. Months later, Adonis received her first promotion. That evening, she brought home a small cake. "For what?" Yugochi asked. "For growth," Adonis said simply. They laughed as they cut the cake in their quiet living room. After dinner, Adonis became thoughtful. "Mommy," she said slowly, "do you ever think about going back there?" Yugochi understood immediately. "The mansion?" she asked. Adonis nodded. Yugochi leaned back in her chair. "I think about it," she admitted. "But not with anger anymore." A pause. "Pain can teach you," she continued. "But it should not control you." Adonis nodded. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I just want to prove that we were never useless." Yugochi smiled gently. "You don't have to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it." One Saturday afternoon, life surprised them. Adonis received a call from an unknown number. "Hello. Good afternoon. Is this engineer Adonis Yugochi?" "Yes, speaking." The voice hesitated slightly. "This is Elizabeth." The name hung in the air. Adonis' eyes met her mother's across the room. Silence stretched. "Yes." Adonis replied calmly. "I was given your contact through someone." "I heard you are doing well," Elizabeth said, her voice no longer sharp, just measured. "Yes, Ma." Another pause. I am organizing a small business expansion and need engineering consultation. I would like to hire your firm." Adonis' heart beat steadily. Years ago, they had stood outside the gate with nowhere to go. Now the gate had turned. "Please send the project details to my office email," Adonis replied professionally. "We will review and respond." Her tone was respectful, but equal. When the call ended, Yugochi exhaled slowly. "How do you feel?" she asked. Adonis thought carefully. "Free," she answered. Not because Elizabeth had called, but because the call no longer had power to wound. The project went through official channels. Adoni handled it with fairness and professionalism. No bitterness. No pride. Just competence. When she eventually visited the property for inspection, the mansion looked smaller than she remembered. The walls were the same. The gate was the same. But she was different. Elizabeth greeted her politely. "You've done well," she said quietly. "Thank you," Adoni replied. There was no long speech. No dramatic apology. Just an unspoken understanding. Life had moved forward. As Adoni walked back to her car, she felt something settle inside her completely. The chapter had closed. That evening, back in their apartment, she told her mother everything. Ugochi listened, then nodded. "You see," she said softly. "When you rise, you don't need to pull anyone down." Adoni smiled. Outside, Lagos continued its endless rhythm, traffic, ambition, struggle, dreams. But inside their home, there was balance. From a thin mat in a noisy compound, to a scholarship from under a flickering bulb, to a university degree, to professional respect. The journey had never been about escaping poverty alone. It had been about preserving dignity. And dignity, once protected, becomes legacy. As night fell, Ugochi looked at her daughter and whispered the same words she had spoken years ago in the darkness of that tiny room. "God, you brought us here. You will take us forward." Only this time, the words carried not desperation, but gratitude. And the future stretched ahead, not as something to fear, but as something they were ready to build. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over Lagos, painting the dusty streets in pale gold. Ugochi woke to the familiar hum of the city, but her heart no longer raced at the noise. She stretched, listening to Adoni's soft breathing beside her, and smiled. Life had not become easy, but it had become theirs. Adoni was already awake, sitting at the small table, reviewing notes for her next project. Her dedication had only grown, fueled by the small victories they had accumulated over the years. Ugochi poured tea for them both and sat down beside her. "Mommy," Adoni said softly, not looking up. "Do you think we'll ever forget those days?" Ugochi paused, watching the sunlight glint off the chipped paint of the window frame. "We won't forget," she said finally. "But we don't have to carry the weight of them anymore. They will remind us of what we survived and what we can still do." Adoni nodded, a quiet determination in her eyes. "I want to help people like us," she said. "People who feel trapped, like we were." Ugochi squeezed her hand. "And you will. But first, we live. We grow. We build." The morning passed in its gentle rhythm, small chores, quiet preparation, the kind of ordinary work that carried with it extraordinary meaning. Each task was no longer a burden but a reminder that they were capable, resilient, and in control. By evening, they had enough food on their table for a simple meal. Adoni laughed as she tried to chop onions without crying, and Ugochi laughed too, the sound light and free, echoing in the small room. As they ate, they spoke of future plans, courses to take, places to visit, people to meet. They spoke not of revenge or bitterness but of vision and hope. Later, when Adoni went to bed, Ugochi lingered at the window, looking out at the glittering city. The same city that had once been cruel, indifferent, and loud now seemed vast with possibility. Somewhere out there, life continued as it always had, but she knew now that they had a place in it, not as shadows but as actors of their own story. She whispered into the night, "Tomorrow will bring noise, challenge, maybe even fear. But we are ready. Always ready." And for the first time in a long time, she closed her eyes not with anxiety, but with calm certainty. Because they had survived. They had grown. And they would continue to rise. The chapter of struggle had ended. The chapter of building, of hope, and of legacy had begun. Weeks turned into months, and life in the crowded compound slowly became routine. Yugochi's hands hardened from soap and steam, but her heart softened with quiet pride. Every coin earned, every plate washed, every shirt ironed was a step away from fear and toward stability. Adoni thrived at school. Teacher Grace's encouragement had sparked something fierce in her. She woke early, read under the dim morning light, and returned home to teach herself more. She asked questions, solved problems, and even helped younger children in the compound with their lessons. The same children who had laughed at her before now looked up to her. Respect, Adoni realized, was earned through patience, diligence, and courage. One evening, Yugochi returned from work to find Adoni sitting on the mat, her notebook open, a pencil moving furiously across the page. "Mommy," she said without looking up, "I want to enter the national science competition." Yugochi felt her chest tighten. The thought of more challenges made her anxious, but she saw the fire in her daughter's eyes, the same fire that had refused to bow before shame. "We will do it together," she said. "We will prepare. You will work hard, and I will be beside you." And so they began. After long days at work, Yugochi would return and sit with Adoni, quizzing her on formulas, helping her understand concepts, and listening as Adoni explained theories she barely understood herself. Nights were often long and the room hot, but neither complained. Each struggle felt like an anchor, tethering them to hope and resilience. When the day of the competition came, Adoni walked into the crowded hall with a quiet confidence. She carried herself with the dignity her mother had instilled in her, honesty, courage, and relentless effort. And when her name was called as one of the top performers, her heart nearly leapt from her chest. Yugochi, sitting in the back with the small bag she carried everywhere, held her breath. She remembered every tear, every early morning, every humiliating moment that had shaped this day. And when Adoni ran to her after the announcement, clutching her certificate, Yugochi's tears flowed freely. "This is just the beginning," she whispered into her daughter's hair. "Just the beginning." Adoni looked up, her eyes shining. "Mommy, one day, we'll have a real home. A home where we don't have to hide. Where no one can push us around." "Yes," Yugochi said, voice trembling but sure. "And we will reach it. Step by step." From the thin mat in a noisy compound, to classrooms and competitions, to moments of quiet triumph, they had built a life from nothing but determination, love, and unbroken spirit. The noise of Legos continued outside, horns, laughter, arguments, the ever-present hum of life. But inside, mother and daughter shared a calm certainty: no one could take away what they had earned. Not shame, not fear, not anyone. Because they had learned the most important lesson: dignity, courage, and hope cannot be stolen. They are cultivated, nurtured, and passed from one heart to another. And in this small room, under flickering lights, Yugochi and Adoni were unstoppable. Months passed, and the rhythm of their new life began to settle. Yugochi's hands were cracked and rough, her back sore from endless chores, but her spirit felt stronger than ever. Every morning, she rose before the city fully awoke, carrying Adoni's dreams with her as carefully as she carried her own small bag of belongings. One day, while washing plates at Janet's restaurant, Yugochi overheard a customer mention a new cleaning agency hiring experienced housemates. Her heart leapt. After work, she found the agency's office tucked between a busy supermarket and a small salon. The manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Adebayo, listened patiently as Yugochi explained her experience and her situation. "You seem honest," Mrs. Adebayo said finally, "and you're willing to work hard. I can give you a position in a wealthy household. It won't be easy, but it's steady." Yugochi nodded, her chest tight with hope and fear. "Thank you, Mom. I will not disappoint you." The new job was challenging. Yugochi woke before sunrise to clean, cook, and maintain the household, but she no longer carried the terror she once had under Elizabeth's roof. She worked with pride, knowing her labor supported her child's education and their dream of a better future. Adoni flourished at school. She studied late into the night, quizzed herself with flashcards, and explained lessons to neighbors' children, becoming a beacon of hope in the compound. Teacher Grace's encouragement and the scholarship opportunity had opened doors, but Adoni's determination pushed her forward. One afternoon, Ugochi returned from her new job to find Adoni holding a letter. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. It was an acceptance letter to a prestigious junior secondary school, fully sponsored. Ugochi's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her daughter. "You see, Adoni," she whispered, "our work is paying off. Step by step." Adoni's smile was radiant. "Mommy, one day we will leave this compound forever. A real home, just ours." "Yes," Ugochi said softly, feeling the weight of every hardship lift slightly. "And when we do, we will carry everything we learned here, the courage, the dignity, the hope, into our new life." From the thin mat and flickering lamp, to classrooms and scholarships, to small victories in a city of noise and chaos, Ugochi and Adoni had built more than survival. They had built resilience, strength, and an unshakable bond that no one could break. The sounds of Lagos, horns, shouts, laughter, continued outside, relentless and chaotic. Yet inside, mother and daughter shared quiet certainty. They were no longer afraid. They were no longer defined by poverty, by cruel words, or by anyone else's judgment. They were authors of their own destiny, and their story had only just begun.